These are the best and worst rock and metal albums of 1985. This is one of those years that I've been following for my anniversary reviews. So a lot of these I either have or will be doing full reviews of. What I want to do is have a video where I talk a lot about different albums. I thought this would be a good format for this. I've seen other channels do similar videos, and I chose 1985, being that this year has a lot of good albums that I know pretty well. I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm going to talk about the best albums. Then I'll talk about albums that are worth a listen. So not the best, not the worst, but good enough to check out. And I'll talk about the ones I feel are the worst. So with that being said, I'm going to start with the best. I'm not ranking these. It's more of a tier list kind of thing where they're all on the same level. So let me begin. I'm going to start with Spreading the Disease by Anthrax. This is their second studio album. The first with Joey Belladonna and Frank Bello, released on October 30th, 1985. I think it's a really good album. It's definitely in their top 5. I might like Among the Living a little better, but with that being said, it has one of my favorite songs called Medusa. I've always loved that guitar riff. Other than that, just some straightforward thrash. This also has Madhouse, another classic. I remember listening to it and watching the music video on MTV's Headbangers Ball. It's a solid album. Other standout tracks are Armed and Dangerous and Aftershock. I also like this album much better than their debut. I've always been a big fan of the Joey Belladonna years of Anthrax because I feel he made the songs a little more groovier and a little more fun to listen to. They weren't as dark and angry as they were on their first album. They made it kind of fun, and that's why I like this album. I'm going to continue with some more thrash with Bonded by Blood, the debut album by Exodus. I'll be honest with you, I didn't listen to this back in the day. I discovered Exodus with Fabulous Disaster, and then I bought a few other ones like Impact is Imminent and Pleasures of the Flesh, but I've listened to Bonded by Blood the first time maybe something like 10 years ago. But it's a classic. It is arguably their best album. It was released on April 5th, 1985. I had this listed on albums I wanted to do a full review for my anniversary reviews in April. I didn't get a chance to do it. Maybe I could squeeze it in, or maybe I'll just do it next month. But either way, I want to talk about it briefly now. This has Paul Baloff on vocals. He was also on the 1997 live album, Another Lesson in Violence. And this is an album that's almost responsible for every thrash metal album afterwards. The only other album that's just as influential is probably Metallica's Kill 'Em All. So for that reason, it's great. It's 40 minutes, thrash start to finish. Favorite tracks, A Lesson in Violence and Piranha. Piranha's awesome. I really like that song, but this one's definitely worth it. I have some more thrash, and that's Hell Awaits by Slayer. I just did a video of this, but I'm going to talk about it briefly. It was released on April 8th, 1985 through Metal Blade Records. In my previous video, I talked about how Brian Slagle took a chance on the band and invested some money and got some better studio equipment and things like that. And it really paid off because Slayer became one of the biggest thrash bands of all time. They were more of an underground band before this, but this album shows the evolution of their sound. The tracks are longer, more complex, a little more progressive, and they were doing different things. So it wasn't Show No Mercy Part 2. It was the evolution of the sound, and they will continue to develop this sound on their next album, Raining Blood. So it's definitely a solid album. My favorite tracks are Hell Awaits, Adorn They Sleep, Necrophiliac, and Hardening of the Arteries. One of my favorite Slayer albums, not number 1, but in the top 3, so worth a mention. I'm going to change it up a little bit, do some power metal. This album is probably more speed metal, but it is Walls of Jericho by Helloween. Released on November 18, 1985 through Noise Records. The only album with Kai Hansen as lead vocalist until their 2021 self-titled album. Kai Hansen was actually on the next 2 albums. So I also wouldn't say it's my favorite Helloween album. I would probably say it's either one of the next 2 Keeper of the Seven Keys albums. I can never decide on those 2. Those are always go back and forth. But this is a solid album. My favorite song is Ride the Sky. It just has a really cool galloping sound and the sing-along quality. But there are other standout tracks like Guardians. I like that one. It has a pretty cool proto power metal sound with great hooks and orchestration. Then there's Phantoms of Death. Really cool intricate guitar riffs in that one. The album has a lot of fans. Some people consider it to be their best because they like that heavy and aggressive sound compared to their later albums, which would be more polished and melodic. Now granted, the production is a little raw, but the aggression and the songs make up for it. and that's why I have it as one of the best. I'm going to do one more under this best of category, and it's going to be some glam metal. I'm going with Under Lock and Key by Dokken. I think it's a good album to check out if you're new to the band. It has lots of solid hard rock or even glam metal songs. Type of album is just very consistent. You could listen to it from front to back. Has a few popular singles. The most popular song is In My Dreams. Kind of a power ballad, but otherwise the type of album just gives you a nice snapshot of what the band is about. The album also sounds better than their debut because it has a cleaner production. Songs have more hooks. They get a little heavy on the track Lightning Strikes Again, which is bordering on speed metal. Don Dokken has some awesome vocals. George Lynch has some great guitar playing. And there's the bass playing of Jeff Pilson and drumming of Vic Brown. If you're new to the band, it's a good album to check out. It's not my favorite, but it's in my top 3 Dokken albums, so definitely worth it. I'm going to my next category. These are albums that are not the best, but worth a mention. The first one's going to be a little controversial, so let me jump right into it. My first pick is Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good by Megadeth. It's their debut album, released on June 12, 1985 through Combat Records. I know some people really like this album. I like the ones that came after it just because I think they're a lot better. I'm not hating on the album. I'm just saying the next 5 albums are much better than this one. The biggest difference between this album and the next 5 is that it's a very raw and aggressive version of Megadeth. After this, the album started to get a little more polished. But one thing with this album, it has a lot of speed, especially on songs like Mechanics, which you know is like an early version of Metallica's Four Horsemen. There's Killing Is My Business and Rattlehead. Those are very fast and aggressive tracks. On a positive note, Dave Mustaine sounds good. His vocals fit this type of music well, but also has some moments that bring it down, especially the cover of These Boots. I know Megadeth haven't done a lot of covers, and not counting the stuff they did on B-sides or movie soundtracks in the 90s. I mean, the ones on their early albums, so that's why I have it in this category. It's good if you like the more technical thrash bordering on speed metal, but if you like the more like polished songs with more hooks and are easier to listen to, this is not for you. But I put this in a good category, the very good or worth to listen to category. Next is Metal Heart by Accept. This was released on February 25th, 1985. Might be another controversial pick. I know a lot of people like this album. It's one of those albums I never got into that much. I thought the previous album, Balls to the Wall, was much better. With that being said, it has some good stuff on it. I think the main criticism is that fans considered it to be a sellout because the band shifted into more of a commercially accessible or radio-friendly sound, and they sacrificed their original heavy metal sound they had on their previous albums. Despite this, some of the songwriting is still there. Some songs are pretty good. Some might be bordering on hard rock as opposed to metal. But as for the lyrics, they're kind of cheesy. Sounds a little bit more like glam metal, a little bit more like Motley Crue. It's not a bad album. It's definitely much more of a commercial album compared to the previous 2, Balls to the Wall and Restless and Wild. And if you compare this to those comeback albums like Blood of Nations and Stalingrad, it definitely ranks lower in their discography. But with that being said, it's not bad. It's one of those albums that's not as good as some of the others. I'm going to do one more album in this category. That is Flying the Wall by AC/DC, released on July 1st, 1985 through Albert Productions and Atlantic Records. It's one of those divisive albums. On a positive note, it has a very raw or even live sound, which some people like and some people don't. The best thing about the album is that it's filled with some great classic AC/DC guitar riffs, and those can be heard on songs like Fly on the Wall and Shake Your Foundations. The biggest complaint is Brian Johnson's vocals are mixed very low, and some people feel it doesn't affect the album, and I've heard people say it's an underrated album or even hidden gem, but a lot of people criticize it mostly because of that same reason, the muddy production, and the fact you can't hear Brian Johnson's vocals, which is probably the biggest criticism. And a lot of people also say that the band doesn't really have the same level of energy as they do on other albums. Also, the lyrics are kind of cheesy, even simple at times. And AC/DC is the type of band that's very consistent. They don't really change their sound that much. And I think this one is one of those albums where they slightly depart from their core sound, and that turned away some fans. But not only that, there's a little bit of filler on this, but still worth a listen. I like it. I rank it somewhere in the middle of their discography, and that's all I have to say about it. Now it's time for the worst albums. I'm only going to do 3 Some might be controversial because some are very popular albums. My first pick is Innocence Is No Excuse by Saxon, released in September of 1985, band's first album for the EMI label. It might be controversial because I know a lot of fans like this album, and I've never really liked it that much. I also feel Saxon released a few good albums in the early 80s, and then after that, their best albums were released over the past 10 years or so. But with that being said, this album has some problems. I think the biggest one is the move towards a commercial sound. It has a very glossy production. It's more polished than their earlier albums from the early 80s that had more of that new wave of British heavy metal sound. And the band is trying to fit into the metal sound of the 80s. Some people said they're trying to do what Def Leppard did and sound more Americanized instead of staying with their more traditional style. It also has a very clean guitar tone, takes away from some of the rawness of the previous albums. There are also more hard rock elements and ballads. The lyrics are simple. They're doing what they think they should do to get exposure as opposed to what they really want to do. The album has a few memorable songs like Rock and Roll Gypsy. Other than that, I can't think of anything else worth mentioning. Next is Asylum by Kiss, released on September 16th, 1985, part of that 80s glam metal Kiss that began with their last album, Animalize. I remember this one very well. Back in the day, I used to listen to it often. I think over the years, it hasn't held up very well. It has a few standout moments. There are the singles, Tears Are Falling, and Who Wants to Be Lonely. The main problem is that it's a very generic 80s glam metal album. It doesn't have that distinctive Kiss sound like other albums that were released like before that. The album doesn't have a lot of strong tracks, and Gene Simmons is not really into the album. It might be due to the fact that he was trying to be an actor around this time. It's inconsistent. Not only that, they relied heavily on other songwriters like Desmond Child and a bunch of other people who I've never heard of. There's also the production is very thin. It lacks the punch of their albums of the 70s. So overall, a weaker album. One more album to talk about, that is Theater of Pain by Motley Crue. This is the beginning of their decline, as the first two albums were solid. Released on June 21st, 1985, the band was in a very bad place. Vince Neil was charged with manslaughter after a drunk driving incident, and other members had severe drug and alcohol problems. The album sees the band moving away from their heavy metal sound of the first two albums and more of a glam metal sound. They changed their image. They start to look more like the band Poison instead of that black leather image. And the album has a lot of filler tracks, and the singles were not even that good. Some of the songs are very generic. There's the track Raise Your Hands to Rock. The production's very thin. It's very glossy compared to the first two albums. And the first two singles were very safe. The first one is a cover of Smoking in the Boys' Room, originally by Brownsville Station. And you know when a band leads with a cover, it means that the other songs weren't good enough to be a lead single. Next single was a power ballad, which is another safe move. Now granted, I kind of like Home Sweet Home, but not good enough to save the album. Despite the criticism, there are a few deep cuts that are not too bad, like the song Louder Than Hell, which has more of that Shout at the Devil type of sound, and Use It or Lose It, which is one of the heavier songs, even bordering on speed metal, but those two songs are not enough to save the album. So that is all. I know there are many more albums to talk about. I'll end it here. In the meantime, check out my review of Slayer's Hell Await, where I go into much more detail of what I said in the video. Thanks for watching. Please give the video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.